Okay, I am Rachael Woody. I'm here with Rich Cushman. We're at Viento Wines, and it is June 13th. And my first question for you, Rich, is why wine?
Why wine is a good question for me. I studied at Oregon State University, and after I got my degree, I was working in an agricultural chemistry lab one summer with friends, and they said, "Hey, Rich, let's do a wine tasting class." We did it last year, and it was a lot of fun. And I knew what Cabernet or Chenin Blanc was, something like that, a little bit about wine, but I had a blast doing this wine tasting class. It was in the Experimental College in 1977, yes, at Oregon State. And it was wonderful. And the next year, or spring, I went to grad school in Indiana. And I wanted to get back to the West Coast after a winter in Indiana. Mm-hmm. And I thought, what can I do? And I was doing science in the lab, in the library instead of in the lab. And so I applied to UC Davis because the wine had really captured me. I had read everything I could. I enjoyed tasting all the time, and the experience of the class, it was wonderful. And it kind of got me hooked. I had the science background from Oregon State. I'd done a little bit of wood carving and wood sculpture back in the day, and so I think I had an underlying artistic bent maybe too. Mm-hmm. And the wine just brought it all together. And I enjoyed the science of the winemaking from Davis, but I appreciate the art aspect too, and it's been a great ride ever since then. So in the following summer 1978, I actually taught the class in the Experimental College because the instructor had moved on to UC Davis. Wow. And I caught up with her there, and we kept tasting wine in a group there. Yeah. So what happened after that? I know that you've been involved in a lot of different wineries in a lot of different areas of Oregon. Well, I was at Davis through 1980, and then I got a job at Dr. Berkel & Wolf in Germany. 4 years of high school German at Weiss High School in Hood River helped me a lot, and a class at Oregon State in Indiana. Mm-hmm. And the Rieslings were the first wines I fell in love with too. Mm-hmm. And so I loved going to Germany. I worked there, I came back and had a couple job opportunities, one in the Central Coast of California and the other in Oregon. And I chose to stay in Oregon. I'm a Hood River boy. I'm a proud Northwesterner. This is where I fit, and it's been that way since. So I worked in 1981 vintage at Knutson Erath Winery. Fred Arterberry and I were the crew that year, and we had a great time. I lived in a tree house on the vineyard property until the windows blew out in a Halloween storm. And wow. We used to go to the swimming pool in Newburgh to get clean and look forward to taco night at the Marshes, the Marsh Red Barn, every Friday. And it was great. After that crush, I got the job as winemaker for Chateau Benoit, and I've just continued. I've sort of marched. For a while, I had a 4-year history career with Chateau Benoit, then I went to Laurel Ridge. While I was at Laurel Ridge, I helped get Cooper Mountain Vineyards started, and Edgefield Winery, and Flynn Vineyards. So I've been directly involved with 21 wineries getting started in the state of Oregon. And almost all of them, there are a couple exceptions that are still in business and doing well. And a lot of people I've worked with, that's been remarkably fun too. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's quite a career. You could almost say you have a Midas touch with it. Oh, no. No? The Midas touch involves creating some gold. We're creating some nice wines. But yeah, I love what I do. I love the creative aspects, and that's what really keeps me going. And it's been a good career, and it's going to continue. My son Peter wants to take over. He's making a couple of our wines now. His younger brother Joe farms our vineyard for us and other vineyards here in the Gorge. So it's just awesome this is a family business, and it's wonderful that way. So talk to me about the creation of Viento Wines. Viento started when I came back from Germany in June of 1981. I was visiting with Charles Henderson, who had Bingen Wine Cellars. I think that was even before he called it Mondelez Vineyard. And he wanted to hear, and he's in White Salmon, Washington. And he wanted to hear about my experience in Germany. And we talked for quite a while. And at the end of our talk, he said, well, you know, I have all these Riesling left over. I planted in my field. Would you like them? And I said, sure. Where we're sitting, my vineyard has been family property since I was a little boy. We used to keep a cow down here and a horse, and then we turned it into a softball field for the neighborhood for a while. A little bit of bushland golf was played there. But it was just sort of sitting there. And so it's a modest site, marginal maybe, but Riesling's a tough grape, and I'm in love with Riesling. And I said, for sure. So in June of 1981, I planted, with the help of a few friends and family, all of these vines, the first 13 rows. We've expanded 5 more rows in 2008 just to round out the site. And we called it Columbia Gorge Vineyard when we planted it. My dad thought maybe we should call it Phelps Creek Vineyard because Phelps Creek runs along the back of it here. But no, I like the Columbia Gorge for the name. And then as we farmed it, we thought, you know, what am I going to do with the grapes? And I was working at Laurel Ridge Winery in 1986. We had a modest harvest off here, and we brought the grapes to Laurel Ridge, and I made my first vintage of Viento wine. And Viento just seemed to be the natural name. The wind here, it's prettier than Cushman, and it fits. It's a sense of this place and the feel, the movement, the wind that we get here. And that's where Viento came from. A little bit more about Viento. We did Viento from 1986 through 1993. And then as our kids were young and growing up, we're making basically a Riesling and a sparkling wine. And I would be out at, you know, pouring wine in a supermarket on a Saturday or something, and it just wasn't working that well. So we put it to bed for a little while. And then in 1999, we were on a vacation, and Peter on a ski lift said, well, I might want to be a winemaker. And that was January 1999. So we brought Viento back with Pinot Noir, Sangiovese and Viognier and Syrah the next year, and made a commitment to just bring it back and go full speed ahead again with Viento.
And you have this beautiful tasting room too that you're going to open soon.
Yes, next week. Next week. It looks like we'll have our occupancy permit, and it's been an interesting journey with Hood River County and Hood River City, but this has been just a long time dream. My dad thought we should put a winery down here, but I was young and foolish and poo-pooed that idea. But it took, you know, the idea of having our own place. Viento's, you know, been around for a long time, but we've never had our own tasting room. We've rented space or shared space with others, and that's been really good. We've had a lot of helpful people along the way. But this is a realization of a dream. This property, we want to introduce people to Hood River and the Gorge and let them experience Viento in our own style, in our own way. It's a family project. My brother-in-law is the architect who designed it. His name is Joe McRitchie. It's been an ordeal to build it. It's no partners or anything like that. It's me and the bank, but we're there. So it's exciting. I can't wait to have people in here enjoying our wines.
Well, congratulations.
Thanks. Thank you.
Where do you see it going? Do you know, beyond the tasting room, have you had a chance to think that far, or where Peter might take it next? Yeah,
I've been in the wine business quite a while, and I've seen big wineries, small micro wineries, medium-sized wineries, And I think the most important thing for a family winery is to sell their wine direct to customers. And that's what we want to do here. We've been through distribution in-state, out-of-state, across the country with our wines and then other wines I've worked with. I don't think that works well for a winery of our size. We make about 2,500 cases of wine a year, and we'll try to sell almost all of that right here and to our wine club members. And we also have a really loyal base of restaurants here in the Gorge. We do a lot of wine for weddings. This is a really nice place to be. Hood River is remarkable. It's such a destination. I've worked in other parts of Oregon and a little time in Europe, and I think the grapes here in the Gorge are as good as anywhere. We have, we're not starting from a modest base and trying to build a wine culture. We've got the potential for absolute world-class wines here, and then we've got hiking and kiteboarding and bike riding and great restaurants and coffee shops and everything we need in this little town. It's such a beautiful place. 4 seasons, skiing, all that. So it's a great place to be. I think Peter and Joe will take this business a long way. Peter makes a couple of the wines now, but I'm not ready to give it up, not by any means, not by any means. So we'll see how that continues in the future as it develops.
You touched on it a little bit, but I'd love to hear more of your thoughts on how do you market the wine from this region. Some of my other conversations, it's, Oregon is known for Pinot Noir, and yet it's so much more than that. So what in your experience, has been sort of the marketing strategies, or what would you advocate for that?
We're in a unique position in the Gorge, and it's somewhat akin to Southern Oregon, I think. But in that, here on the west side of the Gorge, we do beautifully with the cool climate grapes. My Riesling, Pinot Gris, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Gruner Veltliner. And then as we progress 5 miles east to Mosier and 20 miles east to the Dalles or Dallesport areas, we grow from 45 inches of rain to 10 inches of rain. And when Viento was starting, I used to drive to Walla Walla, the Tri-Cities, Southern Oregon, in search of ripe Syrah and Grenache and Viognier, and we don't do that anymore. We go 35 miles from here for one way for our farthest grapes, and it's really unique being able to do that. As a winemaker, it presents me with the opportunity to really get grapes from where they grow best. I'm not interested in Pinot Noir from the Dalles. I'm not interested in Tempranillo from Underwood Mountain. And we've talked to people, and a lot of people have stopped planting that up there. This side of the Gorge isn't central Spain. That side of the Gorge might be. And Riesling is a tough grape, a sturdy, hardy grape. And so it's a wonderful one to work with. So as far as marketing the Gorge, I think it's just, we need to have people experience the Gorge and see there are so many different things we do here. And we just want to see them try all the different wines that go with those different things. There might be kiteboarding one day and sitting on a beach or walking a forest trail the next, and we'd probably have a pink wine for while you're kiteboarding and a bottle of wine for a Pinot Noir or something by the fireside after your hike, something like that.
I love your tagline, Born in the Gorge, because not only is that, of course, your heritage, but it sounds like the heritage of your grapes.
The grapes, me, the winery, the wind, it all comes from right here. This is where my home is and my heart is and my family is, and it's just very meaningful being here. We lived in McMinnville for about 25 years when kids were growing up and going to school. My wife was a teacher and still is. Today's her last day of school for this year in 2nd grade. So it's just wonderful being here. After our boys were out of high school, we decided that yeah, we could take a shot and move to Hood River and follow my dream. And I give Robin all the credit for supporting me on that. So yeah. The other thing, family-wise, that a lot of people don't know is that my wife is Robin McRitchie Cushman, and her father, Bob McRitchie, was the first winemaker for Sokolblosser Winery. And also and then he moved from Sokolblosser to Willamette Valley Vineyards when they were first being built. So, whereas I'm Peter's a second generation winemaker for me, but if you go back to his grandfather, he's a third generation in the wine business.
Right,
so it's
no
kind of
escaping
cool.
it. Yeah.
And the lifestyle sort of gets ingrained in the kids, and yeah, it's a nice life, and they've enjoyed it, I think, and yeah. So and they're continuing it seemingly happily.
Definitely. Well, I'd love to ask you, because you've been in the area and in the business for a while, who some of the earlier winemakers or grape growers are for this area? We spoke of Charles Henderson. Were you familiar with some of the others?
Yes. I've got a couple notes.
Wonderful.
And so Chuck Henderson was one of the first people I connected with. Another was Cliff Blanchette, who had Hood River Vineyards, which was just up the road. It still is. It's under a different ownership now. Cliff planted grapes, I believe, in 1975. His son still runs the Hood River Glass Shop here. We got the tabletops.
Oh, wow.
From him. And, there are all these little family connections. I know Cliff released his first wines in 1982. Yeah, and he planted in 75 or 78. We planted this in 1981 with vines from Chuck Henderson. Celilo Vineyard, Rick Ensminger, over on Underwood Mountain, was planted in 72. Hood River Vineyards. Don Graves in Dalesport, is one I was reminded of that I'd sort of neglected when I gave an overview of Gorge history to a group not long ago. Lonnie Wright, of course. And Lonnie was, I went to grad school at Indiana, and Lonnie's from Indiana, and it's sort of funny. We never knew each other until quite some time later, but yeah. So he came out, and I think he planted in 1982 his own vines, and these were barely struggling along in 1981. I helped Chucker Ridge Vineyard in Dalesport. Dennis and Becky Beeks planted their grapes in 1993, Syrah, and I worked with their first vintage in 1995 at Edgefield Winery. I helped the McMenamins set up there, and I still work with Edgefield to this day in a much smaller role. But so there's a lot of continuity in history. When I was looking to move back to Hood River, I had the opportunity to help start Pheasant Valley Winery. That was in 2003. We made wines under a custom crush arrangement in the Willamette Valley and brought the wines up here to Hood River in winter of 2004. I would commute from McMinnville to Hood River regularly and stay up here in my family's house and work for a few days and head back down to McMinnville and do the jobs there. There have been a lot of times where I've been all over the place in one given day, but that's how I got to Hood River. And I worked at Pheasant Valley from 2004 through 2006 vintage, and in 2007, in the winter of 2007, I had a conversation with Steve Bickford of Mount Hood Winery. Steve and I were high school classmates, and he said he wanted to upgrade his facility and upgrade their wines, and would I be interested in and moving in with them, and I happily did so. At the same time, we were making wines for Phelps Creek Winery, which started in 2006, Phelps Creek Vineyards, and so in 2007 at Mount Hood Winery, I made Viento Wines, Phelps Creek, and Mount Hood. And we did a couple other, we're still doing Viento and Mount Hood, and we do some custom projects still at Mount Hood, different labels, and things are going well there. Have I forgotten anything? I don't know. So, yeah.
You definitely got all of the names.
Yeah. So it's just really cool seeing the development in the wines here in the Gorge. The early wines in the Gorge were a little sketchy, but they're solid now. We've got some skilled winemakers. We talk a lot more dedication to farming. I'm not a good farmer, but my son Joe is, but I've sort of taken care of that. You know, I'm a better winemaker than farmer, but I go buy grapes from friends who are really good farmers, and so that's the whole secret behind a good wine is the quality of the fruit you're bringing into the cellar door.
Right. So for this area, I know there's a Wine Growers Association now. Have you been involved either in this area or back in McMinnville with any of the wine grower associations or some of the entities like Oregon Wine Board?
I was on the research committee for the Oregon Wine Board many years ago. I'd have to go look things up. I've given talks at Oregon State with Barney Watson's class on winemaking. I've been on panels there. I've given a presentation, 2 presentations to ASEV meetings on using barrels in winemaking in the Northwest. I've worked with a French cooperage since 1996 and continue to do so. So I know a little bit about the barrel side of it also. I've been the Oregon representative for the Columbia Gorge Wine Growers Association, and my son Peter is the current president of the CGWA. So yeah, there are quite a few things. We're doing the Gorge Technical Group. We're a Hood River Chamber of Commerce member and part of Gorge Owned, which is a go local is their tagline sort of. And I really believe in the local aspects here. We don't have to go as far away for fruit. We've got a nice tourist base here. Summertime it's crazy, but I love the tourists. It's fun to see the dynamism that they bring to town. You know, maybe you don't get through town quite as fast because they're gawking as they're walking across the parking or the crosswalks and things like that, or you can't find a seat at your restaurant when you want to, but that's great. You know, winter times are calmer, and it's just a beautiful place to live and to be.
Looking at the AVA for this area, and much of the Gorge, it's by state, cross state with Washington and Oregon. What would you say some of the strengths and challenges are of having it be a cross-state region?
I love working in the bi-state appellation because this is the Columbia Gorge. George Washington is not the Columbia Gorge. Hood River and White Salmon and out towards the Dalles, that's the heart of the Columbia Gorge. And I'm just so proud to put Columbia Gorge appellation on our wines. Some of the vineyards we work with, for example, Chucker Ridge is just outside the Gorge AVA. It's in the Columbia Valley, but that works too. We're proud of what we do here. There are some challenges in presenting the wines, but it's more like it's harder for the Oregon side when we have an event in Washington. How are we going to get our wines there and pour them legally, or we usually can't sell them legally. Washington folks have the same challenges when we do an event, an association event in Oregon. But it all works out. Also, it's kind of amazing. I made Pinot Noir from Underwood Mountain Vineyard, which we can step outside here and see across the river. And it would be really hard if I had to put Washington Pinot Noir on the label. It's a great Pinot Noir, but I'm happier just to put Columbia Gorge than Washington on the label. So I probably shouldn't be that taken with that, but I am. So.
It's not the first time I've heard that.
Okay.
And in fact, some of the other winemakers that we've spoken to, having Columbia Gorge on the label is such a better selling point almost, I think is what I heard, to be known for the region versus a state.
Yeah, yeah. And I think a lot of it, the wineries are really going to have to establish their own identities here because the Gorge is so diverse. We are really focusing on single vineyard wines. We do a couple blends, but some of the blends are from single sites, and try to be very minimal in my winemaking approach. The more I'm in it, the less I want to do to a wine. I want it to really reflect the place that the grapes come from. I know pretty much right now what our Riesling grapes are going to taste like this year, and they're just fermented in stainless steel, natural yeast. I've given up using enzymes and everything on my wines. I'll do that for clients as needed, but for Viento, we're just trying to be as simple as we can and really let the site and the fruit show through. So some folks in the Gorge are in doing blends, and some are bringing fruit in from eastern Washington, farther away. I think we should focus more on just what we can get here in the Gorge. We've got it all. We don't have to go very far. So just show it to its best advantage, and it's quite an advantage. Right.
How have you seen this area of the wine industry evolve?
Okay, it's first it was the professional or farmers are being really on top of what they're doing. My favorite example is Jack Brady and Joe Brady at Underwood Mountain Vineyards. They're literally across the fence line from Celilo Vineyards. Celilo was planted in '72. Underwood Mountain Vineyard was planted in 1988, I believe. And they're making up in being just fastidious farmers, what they don't have in Rick Ensminger's experience at Celilo, but they've done a beautiful job with trellising, understanding their soils, going through and figuring out that some varietals won't do well there, and so they've taken those out and planted other things like Gruner Veltliner. I was talking to Jack Brady one day, and he said, well, and I'll have some of this, about getting some Pinot Noir. And he said, well, I'll have some Gruner Veltliner this year, and I don't know what I'm going to do with it. Had he said Cabernet Franc or Tempranillo, I wouldn't have been interested. But I said, of course I'd be interested. It just seemed like it should suit the site, and it did. And I think a lot of people here now are really considering the site when they're selecting their cultivars. We're learning about how important slopes are in the Gorge for frost protection more in the fall than anything, because we can get early frosts here. And then the winemaking group that's here now has kicked their game up a notch or two, and it's going nicely.
Out of all of your experiences, if you had to do one thing over again or do something differently, what would it be? Or what was a great lesson learned, I guess?
If I could go back in the time machine, I would travel more. I would travel more. When I was first starting at Chateau Benoit, Roland Souls at Argyle Winery was a roommate of mine at Davis. We shared a house there, and that was wonderful. Roland was working in Australia. He said, Rich, you ought to come on over. And I said I'd love to, and I was getting ready to do that, and then one thing led to another, and we couldn't do bottling. It just works like that in the wine. So I said, well, okay, I've got to stick around and get the wine in the bottle, you know, in April instead of February. And so that took care of a trip to Australia. I'd like to do more travel in Europe when I was there. I did Germany and France and a bit of Italy, but I should have explored more of France and more of Italy and down to Spain. That's what I'd like to do more. But so when the tasting room is up and running and the boys are taking care of everything, you know, maybe there's still a trip or two to be had and continue to learn and just enjoy life. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk more about some of the winemakers that you've helped get started.
Okay. It's been really rewarding to me just helping new or baby wineries get established. And we've gone through many of them. And it's wonderful to me to see that a lot of the folks that I've worked with are still in the business and doing beautifully well. Roland Souls used to come stay with us when we lived in McMinnville, and he was first scouting out locations for Argyle, and he was a classmate at Davis, and so he's in a whole separate category, and he's done everything on his own. But the first time he came to Oregon, I think, was in a summer road trip with us from Davis up to Oregon, and that was pretty cool. And so Roland's always been a special friend here. When I first started at Chateau Benoit, we had there were some partners there, and it was David Teppola went on to start Laurel Ridge Winery. Bob and Corinne Gross started Cooper Mountain Vineyards, and I helped both of those operations get going. At Laurel Ridge, I worked with Chris Dowsett. He was in high school, and now he's a very well-respected winemaker on his own in Walla Walla, and has Dowsett Family Vineyards. And he was 15 or 16 when I met him. Wow. Paul Gates followed me at Laurel Ridge and worked with him for a while. Then I moved on to Edgefield Winery. Jay Summers was a brewer at Edgefield and helped in the cellar. And he has the J. Christopher label, of course, and works with Ernst Lusen also. So I was at, when I was winemaker at Flynn Vineyards, Michael Stevenson, who was at Panther Creek, was assistant winemaker, cellar rat the first year we started. David Autry from Westry worked at Flynn for a vintage, and Gary Horner from now at Erath did also, so that's cool. While I was doing that, I was also getting Cooper Mountain, managing Cooper Mountain. Melissa Burr was worked with me in 2000 maybe vintage, and she's doing beautifully at Stoller, and we still stay in touch and taste together regularly. Tyson Crowley worked with me at Cooper Mountain. Who else? And then we helped Tina and Mark Hammond get Privé Vineyards going. I've worked with Steve and Kelly Styring at Styring Vineyards in Newburgh. We still work together. I helped Autumn Wind Winery get started, the Tom and Wendy Kreutner, and that's now the site of Patty Green Cellars. And then here in the Gorge, I've helped Ziegler Vineyards started. We ran Dry Hollow Winery, our vineyards, and I'm still making wine for a friend in a joint venture for Zinfandel on a new vineyard out of the Dalles. Yeah, his is called Heartcatcher. That's Alan Busaka, who's quite well known in geology and viticulture circles. And his vineyard is called Volcano Ridge. He's a partner with Lonnie Wright on that, and so that keeps us going too. It's just the dynamism of it all. And now meeting, having my son in it and meeting, a whole new generation of people coming up. I never thought I'd be the old guy, and I'm still not, but I've got a little more experience now.
Right.
Yeah.
So I have a follow-up question to that, especially because you've had such a wealth of experience helping get people started, and many of them are still successful in the business today. What does it take to get started? What is it like to start a new winery or vineyard? Could you speak to that?
You have to have a vision, and you have to be driven. I mean, you have to really want to do it. You suffer a bit at first. Nobody I know has come at it with a big fortune, turning a big fortune into a small fortune. I certainly have not been doing that. I've had, I've consulted for 3 or 4 wineries in a given year, from Troutdale to Rickreall to Beaverton to McMinnville, all in the same year, while we lived at the beach. So you have to put in the hours and get it going. I think there's more shared knowledge now than when I was first starting. I can't believe some of the mistakes I made when I was a baby winemaker at Chateau Benoit. But I don't make those anymore, and most folks don't do that anymore either. But starting wine, it takes a vision and a drive to do it, and then I think you really want to choose a good location that suits your personality and the grapes you want to work with. That's why we're lucky in the Gorge, is because a lot of people have different visions here, but we have the different grapes up and down the Gorge to accomplish that. I don't know if I'd want to be a Cabernet winemaker starting a new winery in Dundee or something, but who would do that anyway? That's what it takes. The money you can find, you can start small, and I think maybe the best format is to stay small, stay personal, stay connected to both the grapes you're working with and know your wines intimately, and then know your customers too. Still, the most rewarding part for me is the winemaking. It's creative. I try to know my wines, know where they started, know where they're going. I don't try to force them to be something they don't want to be. So that's what I believe in.
That's a great answer. Thank you. To speak more about the diversity of wines, especially in this area, and how would you market those wines? It's
been fun in Hood River bringing wines to market. I had, when I was at Edgefield, a lot of their wines were put in kegs. They did it with a beer. We started doing it with the wines. They held up beautifully. And I never really thought about doing that on my own until I was approached by the Jan McCartan from the Hood River Inn, which has a very nice wine list. And she was wondering if there was a way we could do more glass pours and not lose the last bit of wine in the bottle, or wonder if it was fresh or everything. And I said, and so we started talking about putting wine in kegs. And now, since 2007, Viento has been putting wine in kegs. Wow, what's 2007? Putting wine in kegs, and we're selling them to restaurants. And we're up to, we keep around 500 cases of bottles from being recycled or reused just in local restaurants because of our wine and keg program. We are also have a huge following of the wedding venues here in the Gorge. They love wine and kegs. It's easy to set up, easy to clean up, and anything we can do to make it easier for the brides and grooms, we'll be do that. So that's been fun. And then one other thing I'd like to touch on that we've discovered, I made fruit wine. I made pear wine for Pheasant Valley. They were organic pear farmers, and they wanted a pear wine. So I made pear wine. I got a gallon of pear juice to start with, and so I did the 5 ferments on that 1 gallon and did a little science. So the science helps the art. and made pear wine, and I make some pear wine for Mount Hood Winery and the Gorge White House. And one thing is I do another, we have this beautiful fruit in the Hood River Valley, mostly pears, apples also. And so I was sort of intrigued by the idea of cider. And last year, 2013, we formed a new company between the Cushman family in Viento and the Bickford family at Mount Hood Winery, and we call it Hood River Cider Works. And we've been bringing cider, hard apple cider and hard pear cider, and oaky or barrel fermented cider to the market in kegs, and using fruit that would be just go off for being processed into dog food or food byproduct, additives and stuff like that. But it's perfectly sound, beautiful quality fruit, and it's local, and we can turn it into a lovely, lovely cider, and that's been very, very well received. The only downside is that we ferment all the time now. So every month since January or December 2012, we've been fermenting something, be it apples or pears, and then the regular harvest season we do the grapes, the real wine, sort of. But, cider, it's a wonderful thing, and it's nice to be part of that wave that's here, and it's so well received. And, yeah.
Is there anything else that you'd like to touch on?
I think we've covered things well. I'm so thankful and happy to be back in Hood River where I grew up, and that it's a family business, and I'm still healthy and happy and active, and I just want to keep doing this as long as we can, and I'm happy we'll have our doors opening to present wines to our friends and have some nice dinners and parties and good times here, and introduce people to the Gorge and our wines and everything that can be enjoyed and done here. Yeah, this is a remarkable place, and I'm happy to be here and appreciative of it. So
good. Well, best of luck to you with the opening of the tasting room, and
Thanks.
Thank you so much for your time.
You're absolutely welcome. We'll do it anytime.